Sarah Jenkins walked through the busy hallways of Atlanta Memorial Hospital, her comfortable nursing shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. It was just another Tuesday morning in the rehabilitation wing, or at least that's what she thought. The 28-year-old nurse had no idea this ordinary day would change her life forever. "Nancy, I'm going to check on the new patient in room 205, Sarah told her colleague at the nursing station. She picked up the patient chart and quickly read through it. Michael Thompson, age 32, admitted 3 days ago after being transferred from the main hospital. The words, spinal cord injury and wheelchair-bound, caught her attention. As Sarah entered room 205, she found a man sitting in his wheelchair by the window. The morning sunlight fell on his face, highlighting his strong features and the gentle sadness in his eyes. He turned his wheelchair around when he heard her footsteps. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I'm Sarah, your nurse for today," she said with her usual warm smile. Michael looked up at her, and for a moment, Sarah felt something different in the way their eyes met. His face brightened with a smile that made his whole face light up. "Please call me Michael," he said in a voice that was surprisingly cheerful for someone in his situation. As Sarah checked his vital signs and medications, they started talking. She learned that Michael had been an architect, designing beautiful buildings until a construction site accident 3 months ago changed everything. While inspecting one of his project sites, a scaffolding had collapsed, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. "You know what's funny?" Michael said while Sarah was noting down his blood pressure readings. "I used to design buildings to make them accessible for people with disabilities. Never thought I'd be experiencing it from this side." His honest words and the lack of self-pity in his voice touched something in Sarah's heart. She noticed how he spoke about architecture with such passion, his hands moving expressively as he described his favorite projects. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself thinking about Michael. Unlike many patients who became bitter after life-changing accidents, he had a spark of hope in his eyes. When she brought him his afternoon medications, she found him sketching on a notepad. "What are you drawing?" she asked, genuinely curious. Michael hesitated for a moment before showing her his sketch. "It's a design for a wheelchair-accessible garden. I think the hospital's current garden could be more welcoming for patients like me." Sarah sat down next to his bed, forgetting for a moment that she had other patients to attend to. The design was beautiful, with gentle slopes instead of stairs and wide paths that could easily accommodate wheelchairs. There were raised flower beds where people could garden without having to bend down. "This is amazing," she said honestly. "You haven't lost your touch at all." "The accident took my legs, not my creativity," Michael replied with a small laugh. Then his face grew serious. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" She nodded, noticing how he nervously fiddled with his pencil. "Why are you so kind to me? Most people look at me with pity, but you look at me like I'm just another person." Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Because that's exactly what you are, a person. Your wheelchair doesn't define you. I see a talented architect who hasn't let his circumstances destroy his spirit." Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," he whispered. That evening, as Sarah prepared to end her shift, she made one last stop at room 205. Michael was reading a book about modern architecture. "Good night, Michael," she said softly. "Good night, Sarah," he replied, then added, "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Yes, I'm working the day shift all week." His face brightened. "Good. I'd like to show you more of my designs, if you're interested." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "I'd like that very much." As she walked to her car that evening, Sarah couldn't stop smiling. Something had changed today, though she couldn't quite explain what. All she knew was that room 205 would be her first stop tomorrow morning, and for some reason, she couldn't wait for her next shift to begin. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself spending more and more time in room 205. She would arrive at work 20 minutes early just to have coffee with Michael before her shift started. Their morning talks became the highlight of her day. One morning, Sarah's friend and fellow nurse, Lisa, stopped her in the hallway. "Girl, we need to talk," Lisa said, pulling her into the break room. "Everyone's noticed how much time you're spending with the patient in 205. Sarah felt her face grow warm. Michael is just different. He's smart, funny, and he doesn't let his disability stop him from dreaming big. Lisa's face grew serious. "Sarah, honey, I need to say this as your friend. He's not only disabled, but he's also white. Are you ready for all the looks and whispers you'll get? Remember what happened with your cousin Janet when she married outside our race? Sarah straightened her back and lifted her chin. I'm not ashamed of spending time with Michael. He sees me for who I am, not just the color of my skin, and I see him for who he is, not just his wheelchair. Later that day, Sarah brought Michael his lunch tray. He was working on a new design, his face focused and serious. When he saw her, his whole face lit up. Sarah, perfect timing. Come look at this, he said excitedly. He showed her his latest sketch, a design for a completely accessible house. What do you think? As Sarah looked at the beautiful design, Michael suddenly grew quiet. Sarah, he said softly, I've been wanting to ask you something. Would you like to have dinner with me? Once I get out of here, I mean. Sarah's heart started beating faster. Are you asking me on a date? Michael's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests tightly. Yes, but I understand if you don't want to. I know it won't be easy. I can't walk, can't dance, and some restaurants might be hard to access. Plus, I've seen how some people look at couples like us. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat next to him. Michael Thompson, are you finished listing all the reasons why I shouldn't date you? He nodded, looking nervous. Good, because I'd love to have dinner with you. The smile that spread across Michael's face was brighter than any she'd seen before. However, their happiness was interrupted when Michael's mother, Barbara Thompson, walked into the room. Barbara stopped short when she saw Sarah sitting close to her son, their heads bent together over his sketches. Her eyes widened, taking in the scene. Michael spoke first. Mom, this is Sarah, my nurse. Sarah, this is my mother. Sarah stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Barbara looked between her son and Sarah, her expression unreadable. Then, to both their surprise, she smiled warmly. Sarah? The Sarah my son hasn't stopped talking about in his phone calls. It's wonderful to finally meet you. The tension in the room dissolved as Barbara pulled up another chair. Michael tells me you've been encouraging him to keep designing. Thank you for that. After the accident, I thought he'd never touch his sketching tools again. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Your son is talented. His disability hasn't changed that. No. Barbara agreed, watching her son's face glow with happiness. It hasn't changed the important things at all. That evening, as Sarah was leaving work, she found a note in her locker. It was from Michael. Thank you for seeing me, not my wheelchair. Dinner next Friday? I know a great Italian place with a ramp. Sarah held the note to her chest, smiling. Yes, there would be challenges. People would stare, some would whisper, and others might openly disapprove. But when she thought of Michael's smile, his brilliant mind, and his brave heart, she knew he was worth facing any obstacle. As she drove home, Sarah remembered something her grandmother used to say. Love doesn't see with the eyes, it sees with the heart. Looking back at the hospital in her rearview mirror, Sarah knew her heart was seeing very clearly indeed. 2 months after Michael left the hospital, their relationship had grown stronger with each passing day. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Sarah sat in Michael's parents' backyard, watching him show her father how to use a computer program to design simple house layouts. You see, Mr. Jenkins, Michael explained patiently, with this software, you can plan your kitchen renovation exactly the way you want it. Sarah's father leaned forward, his initial skepticism about Michael forgotten as they discussed home improvements. Sarah smiled, remembering how different things had been just a few weeks ago. When she first told her parents about Michael, her father had been quiet and her mother had cried. A disabled white man. Her mother had said, Sarah, life is already hard enough for us. Why make it harder? But Sarah had stood firm. Come meet him, she had insisted. Just once, that's all I ask. Now, watching her father and Michael bond over house designs, Sarah felt tears of joy in her eyes. Her mother came out of the house carrying a tray of lemonade, followed by Barbara, Michael's mother. Look at those two, Sarah's mother whispered, handing Sarah a glass. I've never seen your father so excited about anything other than his car. Barbara sat down next to them. Michael has that effect on people. Once they look past the wheelchair and actually see him, they can't help but love him. Their peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah's cousin Janet and her husband Tom. Janet had insisted on coming over when she heard the families were meeting. "So," Janet said loudly as she walked into the backyard, "this is the man who stole our Sarah's heart." Her eyes moved from Michael's face to his wheelchair, then back again. Michael wheeled himself forward, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Thompson. You must be Janet. Sarah's told me so much about you." Janet's husband Tom stepped forward, shaking Michael's hand firmly. "I hear you're an architect. My construction company might be interested in your services." "Really?" Michael's eyes lit up. "I'd love to show you some of my recent designs. I've been working on making buildings more accessible without sacrificing style." As the men discussed business, Janet pulled Sarah aside. "Okay, I get it now," she said softly. "He's different than what I expected. The way he carries himself, you almost forget about the wheelchair." Sarah squeezed her cousin's hand. "That's what I've been trying to tell everyone. Michael's disability is part of him, but it's not all of him." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Michael and Sarah sat in his adapted van in front of her apartment building. "That went better than I expected," he said, relief clear in his voice. "I told you they'd love you," Sarah replied, reaching for his hand. "How could they not?" Michael was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, there's something I need to say." He took a deep breath. "These past months have been the happiest of my life, even happier than before my accident. You make me feel whole again." Sarah felt her heart racing. "You make me happy too, Michael. But I need you to be sure," he continued. "This won't be an easy life. There will always be challenges. Some people will never accept us, not because of my wheelchair, not because of our different races, but because they can't understand that love doesn't care about these things." Sarah leaned over and kissed him softly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Michael smiled, touching her cheek gently. "My mom said something interesting today. She said that before my accident, I was always running around, too busy to really see what mattered. Now that I can't run anymore, I finally learned to stop and see the important things, like you." As Sarah walked into her apartment that night, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "He's a good man, baby girl. Sometimes the best blessings come in unexpected packages." Sarah smiled, looking at a sketch Michael had given her, a design for a beautiful, accessible house. At the bottom, he had written, "Sometimes the best dreams are the ones we never knew we had until they found us." Spring had arrived in Atlanta, bringing with it warm sunshine and blooming flowers. 6 months had passed since Michael and Sarah first met in room 205. Now, on this beautiful Saturday morning, Michael had a special plan that would change their lives forever. "Are you sure you don't want me to push?" Sarah asked as they entered the botanical gardens. The same gardens where they had their first date 4 months ago. Michael shook his head, propelling his wheelchair forward confidently. "Not today. Today I want to show you how strong I've become." His arms had indeed grown stronger, and he moved his wheelchair with grace now. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael had been working with the garden staff for weeks to prepare for this day. His old architecture firm had helped him design something special, and his friends had worked hard to build it. "Close your eyes," Michael said when they reached a curve in the path. "No peeking." Sarah laughed but closed her eyes. She could hear birds singing and feel the warm sun on her face. Michael wheeled forward, guiding her with his voice. "Keep walking straight, just a little further." "Can I open them now?" "Okay, open." Sarah opened her eyes and gasped. In front of her stood a beautiful wooden pavilion, something that hadn't been there during their first visit. It was perfectly designed for wheelchair access, with gentle ramps and wide spaces. Flowers covered its roof, and fairy lights twinkled even in the daylight. "Michael, did you design this?" He smiled proudly. "With some help from my old firm, but that's not the best part. Look at what's written on the center beam." Sarah walked closer, her heart beating faster as she read the words carved into the wood. "Sarah Jenkins, will you marry me?" She turned around to find Michael holding a small velvet box in his hands. Inside was a beautiful ring with a diamond that caught the morning light. "I know it won't be easy," Michael said, his voice shaking slightly. "But you've shown me that love can overcome any obstacle. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me, just me, and I see you, the most beautiful, kind, and strong woman I've ever known." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as Michael continued. I may not be able to get down on one knee, but I promise to look up at you with love and admiration every day for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sarah cried, throwing her arms around him. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard clapping and cheering. From behind the trees emerged their families: Sarah's parents, Michael's parents, Janet and Tom, and several of their closest friends from the hospital. "You were all in on this?" Sarah asked, laughing through her tears. "Of course we were, baby girl," her mother said, hugging her tight. "Michael asked for our blessing 2 weeks ago." Sarah's father stepped forward, placing one hand on Michael's shoulder and the other on Sarah's. "Son, when you first came to ask for our blessing, I had my doubts. Not because of your wheelchair or the color of your skin, but because I worried life would be too hard for my little girl. But you've shown us that true love doesn't see barriers, it breaks them down." Michael's mother was crying happy tears as she hugged them both. "Welcome to the family, Sarah." The garden staff had set up a small celebration in the pavilion. As they all enjoyed champagne and cake, Sarah noticed something else about the pavilion's design. The roof was partially open, letting in streams of sunlight that made patterns on the floor. The light patterns, Michael explained, seeing her looking up. They formed the shape of a heart at exactly 10:30 a.m., the time we first met in room 205. Sarah knelt down beside his wheelchair and kissed him softly. "You think of everything, don't you?" "I'm an architect," he smiled. "Details are my specialty. And you, Sarah Jenkins, soon to be Sarah Thompson, are the most important detail of my life." As their families celebrated around them, Sarah looked at her ring sparkling in the sunlight. Some people might see their love as unusual or challenging, but she and Michael saw it for what it was, simply perfect, just the way it was meant to be. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in the church's bridal room, her mother carefully adjusting her white dress. The dress was beautiful, with delicate lace that flowed perfectly whether she was standing or sitting. Sarah had specifically chosen a design that would look elegant even when she sat next to Michael in his wheelchair during the ceremony. "You look like an angel," her mother said, wiping away tears. "I have something for you." She pulled out a small box containing a beautiful pearl necklace. "This was your grandmother's. She would have loved Michael just as much as we do." Down the hall in another room, Michael was getting ready with help from his father and best friend, James. They had worked with a special tailor to design a suit that would look perfect while sitting in his wheelchair. "Son," his father said, adjusting Michael's tie, "I've never been more proud of you than I am today. You didn't just overcome your accident, you found a love that most people spend their whole lives looking for." Michael smiled, looking at himself in the mirror. "I still can't believe she chose me, Dad." "She chose you because you're an extraordinary man," James said, patting his shoulder. "Now, let's go over the surprise one more time. Are you sure you want to do this?" Michael nodded firmly. "I've been practicing for months with the physical therapist. I can do it." In the church, guests filled the pews. Some people whispered about the unique setup. There was no central aisle, but instead, a wider side aisle that could easily accommodate Michael's wheelchair. The altar had a gentle ramp leading up to it, which Michael had designed himself. The music started, and everyone turned to watch. First came the bridesmaids and groomsmen, then Sarah's little niece as the flower girl. Finally, Sarah appeared with her father, looking radiant in her dress. Michael's breath caught in his throat when he saw her. Tears filled his eyes as Sarah walked toward him, her smile brighter than any sun. When she reached the altar, she immediately sat in the special chair they had placed next to where Michael's wheelchair would be, making sure they were at the same height for the ceremony. The minister began the service, speaking about love that knows no boundaries. He talked about how true love sees with the heart, not the eyes, and how it breaks down all barriers that society might put up. When it was time for the vows, Michael spoke first. "Sarah, you saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I promise to spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of that love." Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she said her vows. "Michael, you taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect to be wonderful. It just needs to be real. I promise to be by your side, hand in hand, wheel by wheel, for all our days." Then came the surprise moment. As they prepared for their first dance, Michael signaled to James and his physical therapist, who had been waiting nearby. With their help, and using special braces he had been secretly practicing with, Michael slowly stood up from his wheelchair. Gasps filled the church. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Michael stood, supported by his braces and handlers, and held out his hand to her. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Thompson?" They swayed gently to the music, Michael standing tall with support while holding Sarah close. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Sarah's mother clutched her husband's hand, both of them crying happy tears. Michael's parents held each other, watching their son dance with his bride. After a minute, Michael sat back in his wheelchair, and Sarah immediately sat in her chair next to him. They finished their dance this way, spinning together on the dance floor, their love proving that nothing was impossible. At the reception, Janet raised her glass for a toast. To Sarah and Michael, who showed us that love doesn't see disabilities, doesn't see color, doesn't see anything but what's in the heart. May we all learn to see the world through their eyes. As the celebration continued around them, Michael took Sarah's hand. "Happy?" he asked. Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers, his pale, hers dark, both wearing matching gold rings. "Perfect," she answered. "Absolutely perfect." 2 weeks after returning from their honeymoon in Hawaii, Sarah and Michael began their search for their perfect home. Michael had been mysteriously busy with phone calls and meetings, but he told Sarah they were just work-related. "What about this one?" Sarah asked one Saturday morning, pointing to a house listing on her laptop. They were sitting in their temporary apartment, which they had rented after the wedding. Michael wheeled closer to look at the screen, then shook his head with a smile. "I have something else in mind, trust me." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Michael Thompson, what are you planning?" "Just give me 2 more weeks," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I promise it will be worth the wait." That evening, while Sarah was working a night shift at the hospital, Michael met secretly with his old architecture firm partners in their office. Large blueprints were spread across the table. "Everything is going according to plan," David, his former boss, said. "The construction team is working overtime to meet the deadline. But are you sure you want to keep this a complete surprise from Sarah?" Michael looked at the detailed plans in front of him. "Absolutely. She spent her whole life taking care of others. Now it's my turn to do something extraordinary for her." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah's friend Lisa was having trouble keeping the secret. She knew about Michael's surprise because her husband was working on the electrical systems of the house. "Girl, you're going to be so shocked," Lisa said, then quickly covered her mouth. Never mind. Forget I said anything." Sarah laughed. "You too? Everyone's being so mysterious lately. Even Michael's mother keeps giggling every time I mention house hunting." Days passed, and Sarah noticed Michael spending more and more time on his phone, speaking in whispers. He was also going out frequently for what he called business meetings. Sarah trusted him completely, but she couldn't help being curious. One morning, Sarah found a business card on their kitchen counter from Thompson Accessible Designs, a new company Michael had apparently started. When she asked him about it, he just smiled and said, "All part of the surprise, honey." Sarah's father was acting strange too. Whenever she called home, he seemed excited about something but wouldn't say what. She later discovered he had been helping with some aspects of Michael's secret project, proud to be part of his son-in-law's plan. Just a few more days, Michael kept saying whenever Sarah asked about their house search. He was working late into the nights on his laptop, but always closed it quickly when Sarah came near. The mystery deepened when Sarah saw moving trucks at her in-laws' house. "Oh, they're just delivering some new furniture," Barbara, Michael's mother, said quickly. But Sarah noticed the trucks weren't dropping anything off, they were picking things up. One day, Sarah came home from her shift to find Michael dressed up nicely in his best shirt. "We're going to look at a house," he announced. "But there's a catch. You need to wear this." He held up a blindfold. "Michael, please?" he asked, giving her the same smile that had made her fall in love with him in room 205. "I've been working on this surprise for months." Sarah shook her head but allowed him to put the blindfold on her. She heard him making phone calls as they drove, saying things like, "We're on our way, and is everything ready?" The car ride seemed to take forever. Sarah could feel them turning corners and going up what felt like a long driveway. When they finally stopped, She heard multiple voices whispering excitedly. "Okay," Michael said, and Sarah could hear the emotion in his voice. "Before I take off your blindfold, I want you to know something. From the day I met you, you've made all my dreams come true. Now it's my turn to make yours come true." Sarah's heart was beating fast. Whatever Michael had planned, she knew it would be amazing. After all, he had already given her the greatest gift of all, a love that knew no boundaries and saw no limitations. "Ready?" Michael asked. Sarah nodded, holding her breath as he reached for the blindfold. Michael gently removed Sarah's blindfold. For a moment, she kept her eyes closed, heart pounding with excitement. When she finally opened them, she gasped. In front of her stood the most beautiful house she had ever seen. It was a modern two-story building with large windows and clean lines. A gentle ramp curved elegantly up to the front door, looking more like a design feature than an accessibility requirement. The landscaping was gorgeous, with flowering plants and small trees creating a peaceful atmosphere. "Michael," Sarah whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Welcome home, my love," Michael said softly. "But this is just the beginning. Shall we go inside?" As they approached the front door, Sarah noticed it was wider than usual. The door opened automatically as they got near it, and Sarah realized this house was full of smart technology. "Surprise!" Several voices shouted as they entered. Their families were all there, along with Michael's architecture team and several construction workers. The inside of the house was even more breathtaking than the outside. "You designed this?" Sarah asked, looking around in amazement. Michael nodded proudly. "This is what I've been working on for the past 6 months. Every inch of this house was designed with both of us in mind." He began to show her around. The kitchen had counters at 2 heights, one perfect for someone in a wheelchair and one standard height. The cabinets moved up and down with the touch of a button. The refrigerator had a special side-by-side design that made it easy for Michael to reach everything. "Look at this," Michael demonstrated, pressing a button on his phone. The lights dimmed, the blinds adjusted, and soft music began playing. "The whole house can be controlled from our phones or by voice commands." Sarah's mother was crying happy tears as they moved through the house. "He thought of everything, baby girl," she said, hugging her daughter. The bathroom had a beautiful roll-in shower with a built-in bench and easily reachable controls. The closets were designed with automated racks that could lower clothing to wheelchair height. Every door in the house was automated, and the hallways were wide and open. "But here's my favorite part," Michael said, leading them to his home office. "This is where I'll be working from now on." The office was stunning, with large windows overlooking the backyard garden. It had an adjustable desk and state-of-the-art computer equipment. On the wall hung the sign Sarah had seen earlier, Thompson Accessible Designs. "I've started my own company," Michael explained. "We specialize in designing homes and buildings that are both beautiful and accessible. This house is our first completed project." Sarah's father stepped forward. "That's why I've been coming here so often. I helped with some of the construction work. Wanted to make sure my baby girl had the perfect home." They continued the tour upstairs, using the elevator hidden behind a sleek door, though there were also stairs for Sarah and visitors. The master bedroom was huge, with a private balcony overlooking the garden. The bed had controls to adjust its height, making transfers easier for Michael. In what would be their future children's rooms, Michael had installed adjustable furniture that could be raised or lowered as needed. "I wanted to make sure I could reach any crib or changing table we might need someday," he said softly, watching Sarah's face. The tour ended in the backyard, where a beautiful patio waited. String lights hung overhead, and a built-in grill stood ready for family barbecues. There was even a small vegetable garden with raised beds at wheelchair height. "So," Michael said, taking Sarah's hand, "what do you think?" Sarah couldn't speak for a moment. She looked at their families, all smiling proudly, then at the beautiful house that her husband had designed just for them. Finally, she looked at Michael, the man who continued to amaze her with his love and determination. "It's perfect," she whispered, wiping away happy tears. "Absolutely perfect." Michael squeezed her hand. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson. Want to know the best part?" Sarah nodded. "This is just the beginning. This house, my new company, our life together, we're going to show the world that love and determination can build amazing things." 1 year had passed since Sarah and Michael moved into their dream home. Their house had become a showpiece for Michael's company, Thompson Accessible Designs, which was now becoming well known across Atlanta for creating beautiful, accessible spaces. On this particular morning, Sarah was preparing breakfast in their smart kitchen when Michael wheeled in with a mysterious smile on his face. "I have another surprise for you," he said, holding an envelope. Sarah laughed, setting down her coffee cup. "Michael Thompson, haven't you surprised me enough for one lifetime?" "Open it," he insisted, handing her the envelope. Inside was a letter from one of the biggest architecture firms in America. As Sarah read it, her eyes grew wide. The letter offered Michael a position as their lead consultant for accessible design, allowing him to work primarily from home while traveling occasionally for major projects. "This isn't all," Michael said, pulling out another envelope. "Read this one too." This envelope contained papers for a nonprofit organization, the Thompson Foundation for Inclusive Design. Michael explained, "We're going to help other disabled people modify their homes. The architecture firm will match every dollar we put into the foundation." Sarah sat down, overwhelmed with emotion. "Michael, this is amazing. But how will you manage both?" "That's where the best part comes in," he said, wheeling closer. "Remember David from my old firm? He's joining us as a partner. We're expanding my company into something bigger than I ever imagined." Just then, the doorbell rang. Sarah opened it to find their families outside, along with several of Michael's colleagues and even some of their old friends from the hospital. "We're here for the big announcement," Lisa squealed, hugging Sarah. Everyone gathered in their spacious living room, which had been designed to accommodate both regular seating and space for wheelchairs. Michael wheeled to the center of the room, looking proud and emotional. "First," he began, "I want to thank everyone who believed in me. My parents, who never let me give up. Sarah's family, who opened their hearts to me. And most importantly, my beautiful wife Sarah, who saw past everything that could have been a barrier and loved me for who I am." He continued, "When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. But it was actually just beginning. Today, we're not just announcing a new job or a foundation. We're announcing a whole new vision for accessible design." Michael pressed a button on his phone, and the large TV screen came to life, showing pictures of various buildings and homes. "These are all projects we'll be working on. Hotels, schools, offices, and homes, all designed to be both beautiful and accessible to everyone." Sarah's father stood up, tears in his eyes. "Son, when you first asked for my daughter's hand, I worried about your future. Now look at you. You're changing the world." Michael's mother added, "And you're helping other families like ours find hope." Then Michael turned to Sarah with another smile, "But I've saved the biggest surprise for last." He handed her one more envelope. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a picture of a baby's room, but not just any baby's room. It was a detailed design of their future nursery, complete with adaptive features that would allow both Michael and Sarah to care for a child. "The adoption agency approved us," Michael said softly. "We can start our family whenever we're ready." Sarah burst into happy tears, falling to her knees beside Michael's wheelchair to hug him. Everyone in the room cheered and clapped. "See?" Michael whispered in her ear. "Dreams don't need legs to come true. They just need heart." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and Michael sat on their accessible patio, watching the sunset. The automatic lights came on as darkness fell, creating a magical atmosphere. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Sarah asked, holding his hand. "When you were in room 205? Michael smiled, looking at their beautiful home, thinking about their bright future. "No," he admitted. "I imagined a life of limitations. Instead, I got a life of endless possibilities. All because you walked into that hospital room." "We still have challenges," Sarah said honestly. "Yes," Michael agreed, squeezing her hand. "But we face them together. And together, we're not just building a life or a home or a company. We're building a legacy of love that knows no boundaries." Above them, the stars began to shine, just as bright and limitless as their future together.